Good morning. Today we are going to work with our 6B pencil and do some shading. So let's get started. Open up your sketchbook to a nice clean piece of paper. Use your grayscale finder and align the top of it to the top of your paper. And then with any pencil that you have, draw a line all the way along the bottom. We are going to leave this top part empty and come back to it later. Now down here, we're going to make little squares. See if you have room for 10 squares. These 10 squares correspond with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different shades of gray that are on our viewfinder. And our goal is to try to simulate all 10 of these using our 6B and some shading. So underneath the first one, go ahead and write 10%, and then 20%, 30%, and so on. If you've run out of room over here, that's okay. You can just go down to another line. It's okay, it doesn't matter. So the idea behind the grayscale and value finder is 10% indicates the lightest shade on this value finder, and black is the darkest shade on this value finder. So we're going to start with the lightest and the darkest and then work our way to the middle. We're going to put this aside for now. In your 10% box, go ahead and with the lightest hand that you can, barely touching the paper, go ahead and shade that in. Shading is just when you draw lines that are right next to each other, almost overlapping. I'm barely touching the paper. If I were just a millimeter further away from it, I wouldn't be touching it at all. You're trying to get the very lightest value or tone that you can get using your 6B pencil and shading. Now we're going to go over to our 100%. Now we're looking for the darkest shade that we can find over here, but you don't want to do it in one layer. You can do it in multiple layers. And if you shade in the same direction from one corner to the opposite corner, and then you have a really nice flat dark area, then you come back and you shade again very slowly, just making lines on top of lines. This ends up being a much better way of shading if you do multiple layers than if you were to just press really super hard the first time. Now we can take our Q-tip and just blend in our lightest area, our 10% shaded square, and blend in our 100% shaded square. Now let's see how well we did. If we take our 10% and that little hole that's in the middle of it, if we lay that down, then hopefully we're pretty close to that. The way that you can tell is if you squint your eyes and you look at the 10% square and you look at the hole in the middle where our shaded box is, then it should be pretty close. And if you come over here and you do the same thing with the black, then that's hopefully pretty close too. Now we're going to go right in the middle, and we're going to try to get the shaded 50% box to be a shade that's right between our 10% and our 100%. Again, I'm just pressing with middle weight pressure, not super hard, because I know I can always come back and make it darker if I want to. it's tough to get it lighter. So I'm just going to do layer on top of layer, lines that are super close together, achieving this really nice flat value. And when I feel like I'm right in between the 100 and the 10, then I can check it with my 50%. That's not too bad. Now I'm going to skip, looking at my 10 and my 50, I'm going to come in and try to get 30%, which is right in between my 10 and my 50. So that looks pretty good. It's darker than the 10% and lighter than the 50%. I'm going to do the same thing here between my 50 and my 100. You can choose either the 70 or the 80%. Let's do the 70. So right now it looks pretty close to the 50. I know I want it to get darker. But I don't want it to be as dark as the 100. This is where it gets kind of tricky because the shades are pretty close. I think that's not too bad. Let's see. How does it compare? Looks pretty good. That might be a 60%. Maybe I need to add just a little more. And let's go ahead and get the 80. That was my stomach. I don't know if you heard that. Oh, that's so funny. '80 should be a little bit darker than the 70. And then you can get the 90. One of the tricks about shading that might be helpful to know is that it's helpful if you don't have a really sharp pencil. A sharp pencil is going to make very thin lines, and the idea behind shading is that you're putting lines right up next to each other. So it's better if your pencil is not completely sharp. It's better if it's a little bit dull because the lines themselves are a little bit thicker, a little bit fatter, and it's easier to shade. So these shades are so close together. It is, hopefully this looks a little bit darker than our 80% and the 100 looks a little bit darker still. And we'll try to go back in and fill in and just do our very best to get shades that are right in between. So I'm shooting for something a little darker than the 50%, a little lighter than the 70%. It starts to get really tough in here. Now we're going lighter, lighter. Lighter means less pressure. And then this is, oh, this is so light, barely touching. I feel like the 10% and the 20% are the hardest ones. Okay, we can go ahead and I'm going to start with a clean Q-tip, blend in that 20% and go on up to the 30. Now you don't have to blend. I just find that it really elevates the overall look. I just love a nice blended value. And since I continue to go to a darker square, I can use the same Q-tip. Remember, if I were to take the same Q-tip and come back to, say, a 20 or a 10%, I would end up making it darker than I want to because there's graphite here on my Q-tip. So that's pretty good. Let's go ahead and label it Value Study. Now we're going to do a couple of little quick studies down here. One of the reasons that we like values is because it helps us to understand the shape of forms and the light source in our drawings. So let's do a couple of little studies down here. If we draw a circle, now I like to draw a freehand circle by taking my pencil, floating above the paper on my sketchbook and making a round shape, and then dropping my pencil down. Notice that I ended up making lots of circles in order to get the shape that I was looking for. By drawing really lightly, you can just do that until you find the shape that you're looking for. But I have a lot of circles that aren't perfect here. So this is a circle right now. It's a flat shape. And if we say that our sun source or light source is up here in the above and right, and we're going to make a little arrow coming down. In order to make this flat circle appear like a sphere, we are actually going to add value to it. So the idea is that where the light source is shining, wherever it bounces off of this sphere, as if this was a circular ball, a spherical ball, then the light source would create kind of a highlight right here in the upper right hand area. So very lightly, I'm just going to kind of indicate that for you. And opposite the light source is the darker side of our sphere. So we're going to use shading in order to create that sense of a darker side. Now there's a couple things that you'll want to know. First of all, you don't have to use really heavy pressure. You can use multiple layers in order to get a darker value on the opposite side of the sphere. And then the other thing is, where we were up here in these squares, making our shading lines diagonal and straight, here we're going to change it, and we're going to make our lines curved, because the sphere itself, the ball, it is curved as well. And so we want the direction of our lines to support the shape. This is not a flat box, it is a sphere. So it's going to be nicely rounded. Now, as we approach that highlight up here, as we approach that, we are going to lighten our pressure and allow the sphere to be lighter as it approaches the highlight, and then darker as it is further away from the highlight. The secret to shading is a nice, even, smooth approach. So we're going to give ourselves a few notes. Please go ahead and add this in your sketchbook. The highlight is 0%. That's actually the white of the paper. Okay. And then the area that is opposite the sun, this is the area of the sphere that is in shade. That can be someplace around here, maybe 70%, something like that. 70% value. And then over here, we have the shadow. And that's going to be our darkest. That's going to be 100%. And in order to give that sense of a shadow, if this was a round ball sitting on a table, it would cast a long linear shadow. It would actually be a little bit like a little bit thicker in the middle, like an oval, and then it would come just to the bottom of the sphere, and that can be 100% value. We're going to go ahead and make a 4-sided cube, but as if we were looking down from the top. So you can make this by making 3 lines, one that's in the middle, and then one that's to the right, one that's to the left, and a little higher up. All 3 of these lines are the same length. And then if you connect the top and the bottom, and connect the top and the bottom, and then draw 2 lines, one that's parallel to one top, one that's parallel to another top, then you get what is going to be a 6-sided cube. 1, 2, 3 sides that we see, and the other 3 sides are in the back or below. Again, we're going to identify what our light source is. So this is our light source. And so since the light source would be hitting the top, then this would be our lightest value. So in this case, it would be the highlight. It can equal 0. And then the side that is furthest from the sun is going to be quite dark. It is going to be our shade, so 70%. And this is a flat surface. So making lines that are parallel to each other, like we did up here with our value study, is not a bad idea at all. Again, you don't have to get to 70% with one layer. Actually looks better if you do multiple layers and get every layer nice and smooth, trying to get this to 70%. Okay, so that's this. This is the shade, 70%. And then this is the third side that we see. And as it relates to the sun, it's not directly being hit by sunlight, and it's also not completely shaded from sunlight. So it's someplace in the middle. So if the highlight is 0% and the shade is 70%, then this would be something in the middle. So maybe like a 30%, something like that. And it's amazing how just with a little bit of effort and careful planning with your values, and suddenly this looks very 3-dimensional. And to really cap it off, we can add our shadow. Which can be our 100%. And the shadow on something like this, with the sun coming from the top right, is going to come out flat and to the left because it's on a flat surface. And it's going to actually cast a shadow that starts just behind the cube, comes out this way, and then also like makes what will appear to be a house shape. You can really do a lot of studying with shadows. It's pretty fun if you start to take a look at what shapes make what shape shadows. And I'm going to leave just a little gap between the shadow and the shaded side of my object. The reason I'm doing that is because I want to separate the shadow a little bit so that it doesn't just become one big blob, and so that it reads as an entity that's separate from my cube. I like to do this thing where I actually make the darkest part of my shadow the part that's right up against my object, or maybe in this case that gap. The reason is that there's a little bit of bounced light that bounces off and interferes with the edge of the shadow itself. So the darkest point would be the point that's closest to the cube, that's completely hidden from the sun. That looks pretty good. Let's do one more, and we're going to do a cone that is rounded. Give ourselves a little sunlight up here, a little arrow to indicate that the light is coming down. And for our cone, the lightest side is the side that is right where the sun is, and then the darkest is opposite. And again, we're going to change the direction of our lines, of our shading, so that it corresponds to the object. So if you can imagine, this cone is like a piece of paper that's been rolled up, and it's narrower on one side and not as narrow on the other. Then if you make all of your lines go to the top, tippy top of that cone, then the direction of your lines is going to help support the shape itself. As we curve around, we're getting lighter, lighter, lighter. And as we come back this way, we're getting darker. And this is going to be a very gradual transition. We don't want to have a big jump from a dark value to a light value. We want to have a beautiful ombre, because the light is just sneaking around to the other side of that cone. So it's a lot more similar to our sphere. So our highlight side is 0%. And again, our in-between is maybe 30%. Our shade is maybe 70%, which if I look at my 70% and I look in here, it might need to be a little bit darker, so I can come back over and make it a little bit darker by adding more graphite, making sure that my lines are going in the same direction as the cone. And then I can lay down my shadow, and the shadow is going to come from the bottom, and it's going to come straight out. It's going to come from behind the cone, and it is making this long triangular shape. Just like that. So that is the shadow, is 100%. And let's go ahead and make one more object, and that is a pyramid. We can make a pyramid by making a line that comes straight down, and then two lines that come off of it, kind of like an arrow, and then connect the top with those arrow lines. Again, we're going to have the sun in the top right. So the face of the pyramid that the sun would be brightest on, that can be our highlight. The whole side, 0%. And then the opposite, see, this is actually 1, 2, and then there's 3. There's a third side that we don't get to see. This side over here, that is going to be our darker. So that's going to be, oops. That's going to be our shaded side, around 70%. Now this is a flat surface. So like with the other flat surfaces, I'm going to do straight lines that are parallel to each other, just like that. Go really slow at the edges. Take your time. Feel free to pause this video. And then the shadow is going to be 100%. The shadow is going to come from behind the pyramid, and from this front corner, it's going to come out and make a long triangle. That is our shadow, so it's going to be nice and dark. Again, I'm going to leave just a little bit of a gap between my surface, my pyramid surface, and my shadow. You can decide to do that or not do that. That's kind of one of the ways that I try to tell the story, that the shade and the shadow, the shade side of the object and the shadow itself are not the same thing. And then having two different values, slightly darker value in your shadow, that is the other way. Now, if you want, we can come back with a nice part of your Q-tip. We can even, let's get a new Q-tip that doesn't have any graphite on it. And you can blend, always blending from the lightest to the darkest. And you don't have to, if you like the look of the graphite without blending, then you don't have to come back and blend it. It's totally up to you. It's your choice. But I do love the way that that looks. I just have to remember that once I get graphite on my Q-tip, then I don't want to go back and start smearing into a lighter area, because it will take that dark graphite and it will darken it. We want to keep some of the light. So I can come into my cube, blend the lightest side, and then blend the darker side, and then come down and blend the shadow. And if I want to, I could take this graphite that's on here and maybe just very lightly touch the top. I actually didn't even bring it all the way to the front, just giving it enough to help it lay down. I'm going to just use the back side of this Q-tip. I think I can do that pretty well. And blend in the side that has the pyramid, and then the shadow. And if I want to, I can come in and just give just a little bittiest bit. I love shading. I love that. I love with the Q-tip, just with the graphite that's on the Q-tip. I think that's so cool. And with my sphere, this is one of the harder ones. Again, I'm going to find part of my Q-tip or get a new Q-tip that doesn't have any graphite on it. I'm going to start in the highlight area. And notice that I'm taking my Q-tip and I'm making it go in the same direction, in this like circular direction with my sphere, so that if there's any kind of stray lines or anything like that, then it's helping to support the shape of that sphere. Great job. Okay, so the last thing to do is just to make a little label up here. And since this is all about grayscale and values, then we're going to write grayscale and values. So you can do this any way that you want. You can make simple letters or fancy letters. I know some of you are really good at lettering. Grayscale. And I'm going to see if I can make this little, I think that's called an aperture. This little, ooh, that is tough. I don't know if I can do that or not. Ooh, I don't know. Whee, this is not looking great. Something like that. I'll have to do a little erasing. Okay. All right. Now, I would just encourage you to pick some of the letters and maybe shade them in. Why not use your new skill? Great job, guys.